Hello and welcome back to the From My Perspective podcast, where I, Max McCarty, tell you all the names you need to know in the college football and NFL landscapes that could be changing the football landscape in the very near future. If you've watched the last 3 episodes, you know what number 4 is about to be. We finish up our top prospect for each team in the National Football League today with one player from each of the teams in the Western divisions, AFC West, NFC West. You know the format, you know the drill. One thing I would like to note, we are taking away the going into their 3rd year or younger. It will be now 4 years because I realize that there's a few guys that really deserve their shine and might be the most notable breakout player to watch that didn't quite fall into that. So I'm adjusting that for this final one. I don't think it would have adjusted very many things earlier on, but with these teams specifically, that kind of ran into that problem. You won't see that problem present with the Denver Broncos selection. Javonte Williams has only been in the league for 1 season, and he has been incredible already, but now he should more likely than not be the only running back getting these large doses. We saw Melvin Gordon get a fair share, and of course he is still on the roster currently, but I don't see a world where Javonte Williams isn't taking the vast majority of the snaps. A full year of true running back 1 duties with Russell Wilson, sign me up all the way. He runs. He's got that power back style, like a certain Marshawn Lynch that we saw in Seattle with Russ. And I don't know that those two are necessarily correlated or matter a whole lot that they were playing together. But I do think that it's something Russ has been comfortable with. Somebody else that succeeded in that similar running style, Chris Carson. I really like the fit for Javonte. And again, he's one of those power backs. He's going to get everything done. He's got a little bit of receiving talent in his bag. I don't think you ask him to do a whole lot of it, but he does have that talent if needed. The Broncos, just as a whole, project as one of the best or most improved offenses in the NFL. Javonte Williams is going to be a big part of that. I think that so much of the focus right now is on Nathaniel Hackett coming in to improve the passing game like we've seen him do with Aaron Rodgers. Not that he really needs any improving, but when you look at Green Bay's running back room that he had while he was there, Aaron Jones, Jamal Williams, A.J. Dillon now, there's so much talent. And he's been able to do so much with that running back room that I've got a sneaking suspicion that Javonte Williams will be a top star in the National Football League this upcoming season. Next, we move to one of those guys that I had to change the rules around for because the Kansas City Chiefs, they lost Tyreek Hill, and while they did add up some other pieces in the locker room, I think one of the guys they already had is going to make a huge impact this season. Mecole Hardman is a stud, and I don't think he's been allowed to show it nearly as much as he likely should have in the years past, but now Kansas City is much more focused on being a depth team as far as the receiver goes, and I think Mecole Hardman just as likely as anybody else to step up and take over wide receiver 1 duties, and maybe even if he doesn't take over wide receiver 1 duties, I think he can form more of a partnership with Juju than it was seen as a partnership with Tyreek. I think that Juju and his styles kind of mesh a little bit better to going as far as to say that maybe there'll be more 1A, 1B than the 1 and 2 that we saw previous years in Kansas City. Obviously, it would really be 2A and 2B with Travis Kelce there, but you get what I'm saying. And you can't forget about Marquez Valdez-Scantling, but I think Mecole Hardman's comfortability in the scheme already is going to give him a big push this year, as well as just the general fact that I don't think he was allowed, or maybe allowed isn't the right word, but he didn't see the share of the offense that he likely should have and could have succeeded with. So this year, I think that gap is wide open for him, and I think he steps up to the plate. So that's 2 offensive players within the AFC West so far. So how about we switch gears here? We're going to the Las Vegas Raiders, and one thing that I really enjoy about their team is their secondary. So Trevon Merrick was an easy selection for me. Coming out of TCU, I thought he was a little bit overrated as a prospect. I'm not going to lie to you, but he has absolutely proved me wrong early on in his career. I don't think anybody could have expected him to be as solid. I don't think anybody expected that Raiders secondary last year to be that strong, but Nate Hobbs was a pleasant surprise to say the bare minimum. I personally like Trayvon Mullen. I think that he can still be a very talented corner in the league. I think that there's so much going for them in that sector, and a lot of that has to do with Trayvon Merrick's presence of being able to be a true free safety. The only real weak spot they have here is Jonathan Abrams. I could realistically give this to just the Raiders secondary as a whole because I think it's really, really good and will be good for the future. And so, I would be willing to push my chips in, and I'm not giving up on Jonathan Abrams yet. I don't think that would be reasonable to do. He's still got talent, and he's had some issues. I know he had a big injury coming into the league, or in his rookie year. I'm getting the timeline mixed up, but I digress. Trayvon Merrick is my guy to watch for the Raiders primarily because he's going to lift the waters for everybody involved, like Nate Hobbs, Trey Mullen, and so on and so forth. So that is number 3 of 4 in the AFC West. The only team remaining now is the Los Angeles Chargers. They, in and of themselves, have a very talented secondary as well. I would argue likely more talented right away and more likely to produce this year than the Raiders are. And so going with Asante Samuel Jr. here, while he will likely be the cornerback too, still feels like a pretty good bet to me. Injury slowed him down in his rookie year, and it really took away a lot for him. But when we did see him on the field, you could understand why he was such a highly touted prospect. And one of the things I really enjoy here is that he won't have to be this young guy who didn't get a full season to be the leader. Now he's got somebody who can form a nasty duo with him. J.C. Jackson coming from New England to L.A., one of the many additions the Chargers have made to become a great team. Honestly, before I had started making this list, I almost forgot J.C. Jackson made the trip over because L.A. had just been all the way in on making these moves and deciding, you know what, this is the year that we're going to try and win. So J.C. Jackson, Asante Samuel Jr., then you look behind them, you've got Derwin James and Nasir Adderley. It's a really good-looking secondary for them, and realistically, cornerback 2 is the one with the highest question marks right now for good reason. Asante Samuel has only been in the league for those handful of games, but I think this year we get to see a whole lot more, especially as some of that pressure gets taken off of him because now that pressure is on J.C. Jackson. So I expect Asante Samuel to thrive in that role. That completes the AFC West. We now move to the NFC West, and one of the teams that really interests me is the Arizona Cardinals, primarily because all offseason you have no clue what's going to happen with them with K1 and just all this weirdness surrounding them. Their season didn't end quite as well as they had hoped. So one thing that I do find interesting and something that we have, as a football collective, have talked about a lot is Christian Kirk's insane contract, but that does open up a wide receiver spot for my guy for the Arizona Cardinals, which is Rondale Moore. Much like Kyler Murray, Rondale Moore he relies on his athleticism to win, and luckily for him, he has it in spades, so it's not a problem. He can absolutely go out there and do exactly that and win on a lot of plays. We saw it at Purdue. He was essentially their offense, and he's just the definition of a playmaker. He's somebody I really like to see go into that role, and I'm really excited to see what happens with him. So Rondale does project as a wide receiver 2 or 3, depending on what you kind of picture for their roster. I, for one, am really excited about Rondale's fit here. And even if you do really like Hollywood Brown, which I get that he would more likely than not be above Rondale on the depth chart, I think that you get very similar services with both of them. But I will take Rondale on the caveat that Arizona lost a running back in Chase Edmonds. I know you still have James Conner, who was impressive last year, but I wouldn't count out a Rondale Moore role similar to what every team seems to be looking for right now with the Deebo Samuel situation. I think Rondale, we saw, I believe in college, his rookie year, not his rookie year, but I believe it was his freshman season. He ran the ball 20 times on over 10 yards an average, hit the 200 mark. He was just super impressed. Maybe it was 20 for 200 and something like that. But just such an impressive athlete. I wouldn't count that out, which would make him have even a larger share of the offense, which in turn would make him even more valuable prospect to watch. You get where I'm going with this spiel. So that makes one wide receiver potentially getting some running back splits. We've turned our focus to purely a running back with the Los Angeles Rams, and watching what happened to Cam Akers last year hurt. It hurt their roster. It hurt those who are sympathetic to those injuries. I understand that some people they don't want the Rams to succeed because they're rivals or whatever may have you. But seeing a player go down is never fun. And Cam Akers this year, I believe, will be on his revenge tour. I believe he got 5 rushes last year before his season was just done, and that left the Rams in a bit of a scramble. We saw a lot of Darrell Henderson all last season, and you see these moving parts. Sony Michel. I think Cam Akers comes back in, and so long as that health stays with him, he should just take that running back room right back over. There's still a spot for Darrell Henderson and all those other guys in the backfield. I just think Cam Akers is a better option. He's a strong back. I think he brings something that you were lacking last year that you couldn't quite feel, but Cam Akers does offer that in spades. And once he gets a little bit more comfortable, I'm not expecting the hottest of starts from him, but I think that once he gets comfortable, LA really could have used a more stable hand in their run game last year. And Cam Akers is going to be able to provide that. And I'm really interested to see how he comes along and what that looks like. So that is now two potential players in the running back position. I know Rondell's not technically a running back, but I wouldn't count it out. Next, we move to somebody who is potentially taking receptions for a guy who doesn't want to be a running back anymore, but he had a big running back split last year in Deebo Samuel. We're talking about Brandon Ayuk here, and it was hard for me to select a receiver because I don't know that I trust what they're going to field at quarterback next year. I can't say with 100% confidence that I think Jimmy Garoppolo is good, or I know he's solid, but I don't know that he will elevate a receiver beyond where they're currently at, especially not one that he's already got familiarity with and really hasn't seen a giant bump in production underneath Jimmy G. I also don't know that Trey Lance is the guy. And that's a really hard thing to know right now, strictly because we haven't seen anything of him. And even dating back to his college years, he was playing at NDSU, and what was it? It was like a season and a half of playing there before he came out to the pros. So there's a lot of uncertainty for me with Trey Lance. I can see the potential, absolutely, but predicting a receiver to break out while your quarterback is struggling, especially one that I don't consider as like quarterback independent, like I mentioned with Elijah Moore a couple of videos ago. I don't think that Brandon Ayuk is like that, but if they find some consistency at quarterback this year, I do think that he is in line for a breakout. They need a potential Deebo replacement. We still don't know what's going to happen with him, and Ayuk is going to step up into that role, in my opinion. He's already had improvement over his first 2 years, and he's really close to that 1,000-yard mark, but San Francisco as a unit doesn't need a whole lot of breakouts. They get pretty close to the Super Bowl pretty often. Brandon Ayuk just making another step up, maybe getting 1,100 yards this year as opposed to the 8 and some change they got last year. I think that could be enough, and it could really add an extra layer of their offense where you don't just have to focus on Deebo, and that's really what I'm excited about. Of course, you have George Kittle, but I'm talking more in the wide receiver room. If your corners aren't just locked in on Deebo, you have Ayuk that's presenting more of a threat. I think it's better for your team as a whole, and I think that's what will come out of this season. So the final team of the entire collection of teams that I've talked about, all 31 to this point, 32 is the Seattle Seahawks, and I'm going a little bit out of my comfort zone with this one because the general build of this player worries me. But I do think he's a phenomenal talent, and I think that if things play out right, he could be a cornerback one in the NFL. I'm talking about Trey Brown, and the reason I said it scares me is because he is a 5'10" boundary cornerback. Absolutely scares me. But when you go back and look at his tape from OU, he was absolutely balling. He knew how to get the ball into his own hands, how to keep it out of the receiver's hands, and I mean, he's just got the fundamentals and the speed and the technique that you really want from a cornerback one. He just happens to be a little bit smaller than your average boundary corner. A 5-game season last year. He was out for 12 games of the new 17-game season. But whenever he was on the field, you could tell that he was among the most talented players in the Seattle defense. And while it's not the Legion of Boom by any means, you still have some talented players there. Darrell Taylor, Jordan Brooks. Of course, you had You had Bobby Wagner last year. There's another guy I just can't place right now, but you had talented players back there. Trey Brown stood out, especially among the cornerback room. I think that Seattle, in the current state that they are, have no reason to move Trey Brown out. They have time to experiment. And I think if he gets a full set of games underneath him, that talent and that speed and that functional ability to play football is really going to shine out, because no matter how tall he is or where he might be lacking in that regard, I do think he is a pretty good player. So that is all 32 teams now. That brings us, ties the bow on it. I have to find a new video to think of and a new concept to bring you guys soon. But for now, that's all I've got for you. Thank you for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.